Hi everyone, welcome back. We're going to dive straight into our next session, which lasts an hour, broken down into 3 presentations. And this is exploring veteran and employer insights. So we have 3 very different employers here today to talk about their career opportunities and also their personal stories of transition. So for the next 20 minutes, I am absolutely delighted to hand over to Debs, a former colonel and current programme lead with the NHS. As Kate mentioned earlier, there is plenty of opportunity for senior leaders within the NHS at the moment. So delighted to have Debs here today. Debs, I'll hand straight over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a great privilege and an honour to be here and to talk to you about both my personal transition and also the current role I'm doing in the NHS. I should say that I'm over 50. I just thought I'd put it out there in case it wasn't obvious. And I love that Kate has just told me I'm not old. I'm going to take that one away with me for the rest of the week. What I am going to do is talk about myself, talk about Step Into Health programme, and then offer a couple of reflections linking the 2 of those things together, if I may. So first off, I served in the Army for 26 years, 10 years in the Education and Training Services branch and 16 years in the RMP. And I had a quick look down the participant list, and there's lots of familiar names there. So hi, looking forward to connecting with you if I can help. I left in 2016 as a colonel, did all the normal stuff, commanding staff and operational tours, and had the privilege of commanding a Royal Military Police Regiment. I was medically discharged in 2016 with depression, and I'm now very well and have no problem discussing that either here or in a one-to-one. If bearing my soul a little helps one single veteran, then that's okay and worthwhile. So what? When I left, I didn't know how much I'd need to earn and if I could cope on my pension as such. I'd brought up my kids on my own. I had a daughter at uni and one still at school. So I knew that I needed to pay the mortgage and support them and support parents. So there was a sort of level of personal anxiety about the financial side of stuff. Also, kind of as significantly, really, my self-confidence was completely shot to bits when I left. I hadn't left the Army in a way that I'd hoped to. I didn't know if I was work ready. I didn't know what I could do on the outside or where to pitch myself. And also I wanted to do a job that actually I was going to be good at and not struggling. And so what happened next actually was the use of the military networks, and in particular the Samtest Sisterhood. And I heard about a 6-month fixed term contract in the NHS in a local trust. I interviewed successfully for that, and that turned into a relatively senior role in a local trust as their head of transformation. I did that for about a year, left for a whole host of reasons, and I think many of us do not land in the right job straight away, and that's okay. But most importantly for me, my youngest was quite ill. I knew where I was with finances, that was all okay, and I wanted to take some time out to be at home and look after her. I did some other stuff when I was at home, some portfolio working, again through military networks, there's a theme there, became a magistrate, took up some other hobbies like Amdram that I hadn't had time to do before. And then the pandemic hit, just as I was reassessing going back to full-time work. As a result of a little bit of volunteering during the early days of the pandemic, which was worthwhile, but was mind-numbingly frustrating in terms of lack of organisation, I decided I wanted to go back into a full-time role. By then I was 53. I'd effectively had a gap in my CV of 4 years and really understood at that point my age to be a bit of a factor. I did link into both the Officers Association and other employment charities and made the most of the network as best I could. I'd got this idea that because when I was in the Army, I'd worked in manpower planning, in appointing, in discipline policy, etc., that I'd be quite an easy fit for workforce or HR type roles in the civilian world. And I really struggled to get an interview there, and have now decided that actually I'm going to stick with the leadership side of life rather than those command skill sets until you're through the door, and then you can develop those. I'm currently doing a 1-year fixed term contract as the programme lead for Step Into Health at NHS employers. And I picked that up again through military networks earlier this year. So Step Into Health, if you don't know of it, and I'm now switching from me to talk about the programme, is a recruitment programme which supports members of the armed forces community into roles in the NHS. And it does that really by connecting candidates and employers. It started out in 2015 as a sort of pilot study using strategic partners with Walking with Wounded and the Royal Foundation, and using a couple of trusts in the Norfolk and Waveney area, and really focused in on wounded, injured and sick service personnel. But it's now nationally rolled out and includes the wider armed forces community, so families, cadets, reservists, service leaders, veterans, as wide as the definition really can be. Where we are at the moment, and Kate set a national context for vacancies. Within the NHS, there are 87,000 vacancies. Most of those are actually in clinical roles and particularly in nursing. And that's in the context of a 1.3 million workforce. And there's 350 different types of roles across the NHS. But I think quite importantly, it's not a homogenous beast. And I'm sure those that you have looked at it will have worked that out. I think there's 230 plus trusts. That changes almost on a daily basis. And they've all got their own values, they've got their own boards, they've got their own recruitment styles and standards, etc. So, whilst they might have common pay, they are not a homogenous organisation. And what we do is try and connect those trusts to candidates. There's about 110 of them signed up to the programme, but we work with others. And the aim is to offer work placements and insight days, and also just advice to candidates who are looking for roles. The pandemic has helped us in many ways in terms of demonstrating the sort of close working relationship, the transferable skills, the cultural fit, and the shared values between the armed forces and the NHS. But in other ways, it really hasn't helped, because we haven't been able to do the live events that were the sort of cornerstone of the programme. So we've been trying to develop a whole host of different resources online. There are a number of webinars on the Military Step Into Health page, which talk you through applying for roles in the NHS. We offer one-to-ones with candidates in terms of, sort of discussing where they are. And on the other side, we're working with employers on a daily basis to encourage the removal of some of the barriers that are put up. And that might be something as simple as the job spec dictating that you need NHS experience in order to apply. And so sort of working through that. And where we're going in terms of a programme, you will have noted the Health and Social Care Bill and the media coverage of that, and the development of integrated care systems. So that for me means strategising the programme slightly and working not necessarily at trust level, but maybe working at regional or integrated care system level. We're not funded at the moment to support the social care side, but we're trying to do what we can in terms of linking both health and social care in there. Some of the so what's, if you wanted to have a one-to-one, we'd be really happy to do that. I know I've spoken to a couple of you on there, on the participants list already, and we can signpost you to other ways to find out information or for particular roles. If you're looking to find out generic information about the NHS before you apply for a role, then look at things like the King's Fund and the NHS England website, because there's some quite useful infographics and sort of educational tools in order to sort of put you in the room, if you like. The other thing we do is we have a candidate management system. There's about 1,600 folk that are logged on to that at the moment. And that allows you to connect directly with a trust and talk about opportunities there. And I would say, actually, my sense is that there are a whole host of folk from the veteran community and the wider armed forces community, and not, who are really forces friendly in terms of employment. That's not just because it makes perfect business sense to them, but actually there's a real passion there for being as supportive as possible for the armed forces community. I'm going to pause and breathe and then talk to you about some of the data that we've been looking at. So we've been analysing data from the NHS Jobs website, and about 220 organisations, NHS trusts, etc., use a specific question on there, which is, are you a member of the armed forces community? And folk that tick that, then we have access to that data to analyse in order to be able to develop our programme. Some of the organisations will offer guaranteed interview schemes, and I know that was mentioned earlier, and that can be quite a frustration for veterans and members of the armed forces community, mostly because it doesn't necessarily guarantee you an interview, it doesn't do what it says on the tin. And what it does do is say that if you meet the minimum criteria, then you can get through to the next stage of the recruitment process. And I've applied for jobs recently and spoken to the recruitment managers, which you must always do, and said, you don't offer a guaranteed interview scheme. If I meet your criteria, can I have a guaranteed interview? And sometimes that sort of level of cockiness gets you to interview, and it's quite helpful. So do the conversations with the recruitment manager that you're invited to do through NHS Jobs, but also ask for an interview, and you may get one. So that data also tells us that about 33,000 members of the armed forces community applied for roles in the NHS between May 19 and June of this year. And so it is still a popular avenue for folk to go through for all of those things I talked about earlier, the shared values and the good cultural fit. Only about 1,300 got jobs. A lot are getting stuck in the application process. A lot are getting stuck because they just chuck their CV into the supporting information, and that's just not going to get you anywhere in the NHS, sadly. You do need to really go through that supporting document and demonstrate how you meet the essential criteria. What's good in terms of this audience is that of the 50 to 59-year-old bracket, they are the most successful from our applicants at getting to interview, but then they're getting stuck at interview. And a lot of folk haven't had an interview for a very, very long time. And so I would say if you're there, then you really must take advantage of all of the interview advice and practice that you can get. The other thing the data tells us is that women are 3 times more likely to apply than men, and that's not really surprising given that the NHS is about 77% women. Admin and clerical roles and estates and ancillary staff groups are the most popular for the armed forces community. And if you're on NHS Jobs, then those are the ones you ought to be ticking in terms of your additional filters anyway. Most people are applying for the senior roles because they do a straight read across of salary, and they note that actually they're not going to get the same as they got in the military. Well, I think that's not surprising necessarily. And so those roles at sort of 8A up to very senior manager are the most popular ones, but not necessarily the most successful. And I might talk about pitch sort of shortly in a minute. Certainly happy to pick it up in questions. I think Matt mentioned earlier that sort of the military bias, and Stuart also talked about leaving your rank behind. And I'm hoping the work that we're doing in Step Into Health is improving the understanding of the armed forces community amongst our employers. But ultimately, I do think we as a group have a duty here. And if I'm honest, I really cringe when I see military rank being used in an NHS address book. It's not necessarily helpful. So moving on then to some sort of personal reflections in the last few minutes, and then some time for questions tonight. First of all, I would say make sure you've got a really clear understanding of your drivers when you're looking for your next role, and whether that's salary, whether it's location, flexible working status, or sector or whatever. Because actually I didn't, and I was sort of driven by just this need to try and find a job to look after kids. Don't undersell yourself. That's something I've done a lot. But also just don't send your CV unsolicited to folk. Have a conversation by all means, and have lots of conversations. But wait until you're invited for your CV in the NHS context. I talked about using military networks, and I would really advocate that again. And I hope that I'm now playing that forward through the role that I'm doing, but also the additional work that I do to support veterans. It does take time to build the networks in the NHS, so do keep having those conversations. And if you're offered a fixed term contract in the NHS, I wouldn't worry about it. That's pretty standard, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be out in the rear at the end of that fixed term contract. I talked a bit about pitch earlier, and in the NHS it is difficult to know where to pitch yourself. I would say, and this is really unhelpful, sorry, don't go in too low, but also be realistic. So if you go in too low, you might struggle to move upwards to where you ought to be really quickly, but you're unlikely to be going in at board level straight from the military. So you should be looking in the 8s and picking up something there. And I think there was an earlier question as well about age bias in terms of whether that's at the application stage or at the interview stage. And I would say, actually, in terms of the NHS recruitment process, the NHS is a very flexible, very inclusive employer. It's unlikely to be at the application stage, but it is going to be obvious from the experience that you put in your supporting documentation that you've got a level of maturity about you. And occasionally there might be age bias at interview, because you may well be scaring the socks off the interview panel with some of your examples. So it really is about doing that mirroring and matching that we were hearing earlier. And I'm going to finish with another bit of bearing my own soul. I went for quite a grown-up job very recently and didn't get it, and asked for feedback. And the feedback was brilliant, actually. And it really said that the panel felt that they knew I had the knowledge, skills and experience to do the job. They knew, because they knew me, that I had loads of examples, but I really undersold myself in terms of that interview. So my advice would be ask for feedback, don't undersell yourself, and make the most of the advice available to you from those military networks and the military organisations that are out there. I think that leaves me about 5 minutes for questions, so happy to take any that are there.
Thank you, Debs. That was fantastic, very honest and very insightful. Really appreciate it. So we have had a handful of questions come through. We'll start with one from David. So David said, during COVID-19, an important element of Armed Forces support to the NHS was in planning, project management and logistic delivery. Are the NHS open to taking ex-military into such roles to embed their own resilience?
Absolutely. And we did a recruitment event this week with another organisation, actually with CTP. And as a result of that, somebody's been offered a job. I mean, that's within a week. And that was in the resilience planning. Absolutely, and yes. And I think greater than ever, the understanding of the military transferable skills is there. But if I can help anyone on that journey, then give me a yell.
Excellent, thank you. And you mentioned the kind of 50 to 59-year-old age group being brilliant at getting to interview, but then some things, not going quite right during the interview. In your opinion, what's going wrong? What could be improved? What's your advice for having a great interview with the NHS?
So my personal view, and I think it's come out of my own transition, is that at interview, people are looking to see whether you can do the job and whether you're going to fit in. And you're probably at interview because you can do the job. But you've got to demonstrate that, and I didn't in the example that I gave you earlier. And then the cultural fit bit is something that actually you can't beat yourself up about, because if you're not the right cultural fit, then you really need to be looking elsewhere. And I think we've heard that earlier. But also the thing you can't manage is how anyone else does. So you can work out how to be your best self, but if that's not the best person that's been on the board that day, you're not going to get the role. Or if it's somebody that they've already identified beforehand, we know that happens. So, so make sure your examples are right, but don't beat yourself up if it doesn't go well.
Thank you. Now thinking about opportunities, obviously you mentioned logistics earlier, being a good fit for a former officer. Are there any other roles that you would advise people looking at, or maybe roles that people wouldn't necessarily think of when thinking about the NHS?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's 350 odd different roles, but the classic ones are the project management. And at the moment, there's lots going on in the transformation space. There's lots of senior leadership roles going, sort of being advertised. Transformation is something which we're a really good fit for. And as we move to the integrated care systems over the next sort of couple of years, they'll be crying out for folk with our skill sets there. And that might not necessarily be at trust level, which is why I've said look at the King's Fund and really understand the NHS. It might be at something like the commissioning support units or at the clinical commissioning groups, which are going to become what's called ICBs, integrated care boards in the future. So don't just look at trusts and hospitals, but look wider than that at NHS England and NHS Improvement. Look at NHS Digital if you've got sort of skills in the IT world. Look at the business skills unit, and Neil Emery there is very forces friendly, and there are loads of other sort of back office skills, leadership and particularly admin and clerical stuff.
Excellent, thank you. If you're happy, we've got time to squeeze in just one more question, which comes up quite a lot, and it's about progression within the NHS. Is it once you're in, is it quite easy to progress? What does that look like?
I actually think this is one of the strongest selling points of the NHS, and so I'm hitting myself. I didn't mention it earlier because actually once you're through that door and you can start to demonstrate you've got a bit of NHS experience, the progression is really easy. You've got also access then to the internal applicants and the internal roles that are advertised. But progression doesn't, it's not stayed, it's not time related. If you're good enough for a new job, you can be applying early.
Excellent, thank you. Well, that's 20 minutes, which has absolutely flown by. So thank you again for joining us and for sharing your insights. Just quickly, if people are interested in reaching out or even hearing more about Step Into Health, what's the best route? Can they reach you on LinkedIn, or what would you advise?
So either LinkedIn or through Armed Forces at nhsemployers.org, or go onto the NHS Military Step Into Health website. It's called Military Step Into Health. And you'll get hold of us through our Armed Forces box there.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Debs. So next up, we have Alan Cliff, who left the army after a full career in 2014. Alan is now a project management director working mostly within the defence sector for Tetra, who some of you may know were formerly WYG. So Alan's here today to share his transition story and, more importantly, his sector knowledge. So Alan, I will hand straight over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody. So a very nice introduction, and thank you, Debs. I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of your insightful commentary there, and I'll try and come at this from a slightly different perspective. So a little bit about me. As we said, I did a full career, nearly 40 years in the Royal Engineers. I was nearly always on the technical side, so I had a distinct advantage of working with our civilian counterparts in the Defence Infrastructure Organisation for most of my career, which made me a natural fit to move across into civilian roles associated with construction project management, or indeed on the technical side related to my profession, which is electrical engineering. As I came towards the end of my career, I was working on a particular programme in London, and the Defence Infrastructure Organisation noted that I was leaving. They had opportunities that they wanted me to support them with and to continue to support with. So I was working my network. And as a result of that, WYG, as it was then, approached me directly to recruit me to continue that role as a contractor. So I was quite lucky. And it goes to show that if you can maintain a form of relevance to your role in the military, that you'll find the transition, particularly as you come out with a vast amount of experience, that much easier. And I really want to talk about those bits, and I've got a number of top tips, because I've over the years helped mentor certain applicants through the WYG and the Tetra recruitment process. I've mentored people through the British Legion. I've mentored people through the Officers Association links too. And one of the most common failures I find is that in CVs and things that I look at, they are not relevant sometimes, and they're certainly not civilianized. And that is very, very key. Some of my bosses will look at CVs from military people and they'll go, I don't understand him, Alan. What's he trying to say he does? He says he does project management, but there's all this guff in here. I don't understand it. So you have to be relevant. You have to make your CV look correct to the job and opportunity that you're looking for. Another good top tip is I found it really quite easy to do the 30-second brief that the Career Transition Partnership suggests that you do. And it certainly is quite a powerful tool. You get very little time if you're meeting people on that pre-job interview, or you manage to meet people that you're talking about to a job. And if you can get a powerful 30-second piece to draw his attention to you or her attention to you, it's very powerful, and practice it. And if you're going in a particular market, practice it to that market. Make sure it's relevant. It's really very powerful. And in terms of the way that you express yourself in telling people how good you are, I would say that age is not really a factor. I've not really experienced any employers or any people in my organisation that have suggested that age is an issue. Quite interesting. I'll come back to the point as when you are employed, there is a certain amount of, are you going to retire out? Now, I may only look 28, but I'm actually nearing 63. So I'm a little bit older than Debs. And there are certainly those conversations that go around, particularly as people are trying to chase your director slot in the company. Be assured there are plenty of people that want to take your job out there. So to come back to the point on how you need to express yourself, there's a couple of top tips that I've learned over the years. There's an acronym that we use when we're putting tenders together, and I think it's very relevant for an approach on a CV, and we call it NOS. When you're looking at a job advert, you'll see things that they're asking you to be, their needs. That's the first acronym piece, need. Get to understand what he's asking for. And then you will have a view of what he thinks the outcome will be. He has this need, what's he asking you to be able to produce? And then you will have, perhaps, based on your experience, a solution. So S, a solution of how you might fulfill that need for him. And then you back it up with where you've provided that solution, i.e. your experience. So NOS is a good methodology, and I recommend it to people to use in CVs. The way that I did it was to answer the job spec based on experience. But what I did was I identified against the need a benefit that I did, a relevant benefit. What did I deliver? There's a lot of CVs out there that will say that I invaded Afghanistan, I did this, I did that, I did the other, but actually it's not relevant. You need to be more specific, and we've certainly turned CVs away where somebody has tried to sell themselves at too much of a generalistic level. They need to be fairly specific. So again, coming back to the relevancy piece. So what did you do? What benefit did you deliver? Can you put a cost to it? Or can you put a value to it? Did you improve an efficiency? Did you make something better? So those are two top tips for when you're looking for applications and providing an application. Another piece that we always ask for in Tetra Tech, along with CVs, is to put a cover letter with your CV. Because what the CV doesn't tell your prospective employer is what your expectations are. And whilst there is always this banter about salary expectation and promotional expectation and all the rest of it, it's worth being relevant in a covering letter and saying where you live, where you want to go, what sort of things you aspire to, and what career progression you might expect. And it doesn't hurt to put a salary band in there for the beginnings of negotiation, because believe you me, they'll pitch you low, and it's worth thinking about how you want to tackle that strategy. For me, I used a colleague out of my network that worked in the same industry, and he guided me to the methodology I needed to negotiate. I went in a little bit lower than I wanted to in my first year, but with an expectation that I believed that I could deliver the benefit, i.e. I could win contracts for them, which I did, and that guaranteed me the next level promotion. And subsequently after that, because I understood how to answer, particularly defence tenders from a consultancy project management point of view, I've ended up where I am today as a director. But you have to keep that going in the commercial world. If you can't keep that going, if business doesn't come in, and COVID has been particularly challenging, then expect change, expect the threat of redundancy, and expect it to be relevant. It's not an easy world out in the commercial world, certainly quite difficult compared to the public sector. In that respect, be flexible to change. Some people that are somewhat older and come with experience will tend to look at their young bosses and say, well, I do it this way or I did it that way. Be receptive to change. Use your experience to help them facilitate the change that they're looking for. You won't get any benefit by trying to put down your old ways. And in that way, keep current. I always say that when you're coming towards the end of your career, or you're doing any sort of formal training that will help your next development process, start to read the publications around the sector that you want to go into. Get to be relevant, understand the speak, understand the current market situation, understand the current nuances and innovations that are coming out of that market. Because if you don't do that research, it will become apparent when they start to talk to you. By all means, use your network. I've certainly been approached before and since by using LinkedIn. If anybody's looking for me on LinkedIn, don't look for Alan, look for Leonard. I've got one of those oddities that I use my middle name, not my first name. There are occasions where people might want to try and bring an age into the conversation when being recruited. Avoid it. It's not necessary. Divert the conversation and go back to what your relevant experience is. In terms of relevance of experience, I would say it's important to concentrate on the last 5 years. Most employers in my sector think that anything older than that, unless it's a continuous experience in the right relevant area, the last 5 years is key. Anything more than that, just summarise. They're not really interested. They probably won't read it. We've mentioned don't be afraid to barter your salary. I did. It went up 10,000 before they even made me an offer. So it goes to show it can be done. I would also say when you get into a certain age, don't be afraid, and this doesn't necessarily apply to me, but it certainly has applied to people that I've met in my industry. Don't be afraid to go for something that's less stressful and easy for you to deliver. I can remember some years ago talking to a brigadier who said, well, I'm going to go into the Defence Infrastructure Organisation rather than as a private sector individual. He said, because it's easy. I know how to do that and I won't lose hair out of it, Alan. He said, if you go into the commercial world, there'll be a lot more pressure. And there is. But it depends what you want. But don't be afraid to go for something less that you can deliver easily. Because at the end of the day, quality of life and your family matter. And the commercial world will put a lot of pressure on you. And as you get older, I have to say, you start to think about quality of life a little bit more than perhaps when you were younger. So those are my top tips. I think then I'll leave myself open to any questions.
Fantastic, thank you, Alan. So we had a couple come in as you were speaking, but to everyone in the audience, please do keep using that Q&A function as we do have enough time. So firstly, any advice on qualifications and training that you would recommend people taking, particularly for breaking into your sector? Obviously, a lot of people are leaving with learning credits and trying to decide where best to spend them.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite interestingly, the company that I currently work for, Tetra, have asked me to go for chartered project manager, something which I went, really, at my age? So the Association for Project Management is by far and wide the most popular methodology these days for project management qualification. I believe they still do training pieces on the Defence Gateway and the Defence Learning sites, so that there are a couple of ways in which defence candidates can achieve APM. What I would say is for the candidates that don't understand it particularly very well, or they haven't been working in the contracting sector of defence, then it's worth doing an APM course. They're quite expensive and they'll use a lot of your learning credits. If you're adept at it and you can find the training that's provided on the Defence Learning Portal, then I believe you can just apply for the exam in itself and go straight to it. But be aware that APM expect you to absolutely use their terminology and reflect it back in any exam or in any discussion that you have with them. So again, coming back to relevancy, you would really need to get hold of their book of knowledge and absolutely understand all of their terminology. So APM, I came at it from quite a few years ago, given that I'm just a young chap and I did Prince 2. APM accepted that, and they accepted my experience as a means for me to get a full member of the APM. Do not be afraid to go for full member straight to APM, even in your current role. Some of you may well be able to achieve it, but do your research before you apply for it, because again, you'll need to fill out relevant experience in the way they expect to seek it. And we have a lot of people in Tetra Tech that can help people with that. And I've certainly been mentoring my junior colleagues on how to apply for APM. I recently mentored a young apprentice, and he got through to a national award, which is good to see. And I'm about to take on 2 more apprentices, I think. It does take a bit of time, but once you get them into understanding that they need to read and then be able to make things relevant again on how they deal with their qualifications, then APM would be what I would choose.
Excellent advice, thank you. So we have a question from Andrew around salary negotiations. So do employers use your service pension against you whilst you're in those negotiations? And maybe some of your top tips for negotiating a higher salary in general.
Yeah, I cannot deny that they don't refer to it sometimes and say, well, you've got enough money, why do you want some more? They can't do that. I mean, if you are providing them with a benefit, a value, a service, then you should really be looking at the industry sector levels. APM certainly publish sort of sector guidelines on salary reviews that they conduct across the whole of the country. I have to say it's reasonably accurate. Obviously, if you're going for something of a more high-level tier 1 supplier, there are differences in salary depending on where you go and with whom you work for. I've seen some fairly senior officers go in at higher than national average salaries than perhaps more junior colleagues. It really depends on how good your negotiating skills are. If you've got somebody in the sector or in the company that you know is a military person and can provide you advice on where to pitch yourself, it's of benefit. As I say, I did that, and I had an insider, if you like, and he said, well, look, they're offering you that, I'll just go for another 10,000 because they can afford it. And he was dead right, and they just did. So if you've got no other means, then I would suggest that you look at the salary reviews that are generally speaking available online, and certainly available from the APM.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one final question before we hit 12:10. So relevance keeps coming up. It came up in your presentation, it's come up throughout the day. How do you articulate this with no commercial experience?
That's a very good point. It's when you look at it from a viewpoint of military benefit. So I can remember advising an SO1 from Shape some years ago that he said, well, how do I do that? I've not really had any commercial experience on. And I said, well, you haven't in certain circumstances, but you can perhaps turn around what you have done to make it relevant. And so I said, look, what have you done in terms of your current role where you have added benefit and value, where you can describe an efficiency? Now that may not seem like a commercial piece, but actually it translates into the civilian mind. Well, okay, you can't put a value on it, but it does show that he understands that the business had a need. He was responsible for trying to sort something out, and he managed to deliver an efficiency. It's probably easier for those of us in the technical side of life, but if I think of one that I put in a CV, I was the property manager out in Afghanistan, and one of the problems that they had was reporting repairs and bits and bobs like that. And I created a system that improved the efficiency of reporting and repair by almost 80% within 6 months. And they thought that was absolutely fabulous. I mean, I didn't have the delegated commercial responsibility, but my methodology enabled me to show that I actually developed a system whereby I could develop, benefit, and it was relevant. I hope that kind of answers it.
Definitely, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. I know I said that was the last question, but we've had an excellent one come through from Richard. So this is definitely the last. But is a part-time or portfolio work an option, or is full-time work required to gain commercial experience?
Well, there are a range of different options there. There are certainly companies, and ours is certainly one you could approach, where you could come in on a work experience basis. Certainly those of you that have got a termination period, I would recommend that if you feel that commerciality is a weakness, then certain elements of it can be learned. There are courses available on defence learning as well. So I know that there's a contract procurement course that you can do, which is not bad in terms of commercial experience, and starts to get you in there if you're able to get on it. But yes, you can get work experience, you can get attachments. We're not averse to that. I know that we deal with the Royal Engineers fairly regularly, and we've even taken on regular soldiers who because of their technical qualifications require a civilian attachment. And we took on a candidate a couple of years ago for a year to give him experience, even though he's still being paid for by the army, and he would have got all of that commercial experience in there. So there are different avenues to get experience. Work experience is certainly one of them. If you're really worried, I would say to you, it's not that difficult to learn, particularly as officers. You certainly have the brain capacity, and there are, as Debs was putting it, there are industry-friendly people out there who will help you. They will mentor you, use the brain that you have and the intelligence that you have, and it doesn't take that long to get there.
That's fantastic advice to end on. Thank you, Alan, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. So next up, we have a slightly different presentation, and I'm delighted to welcome Poonam Kaur, Managing Director and Tutor at OnBoarding Officers. So for those of you who don't know, OnBoarding Officers is an exclusive community for exiting military officers, helping you to transfer your skills into the commercial world and become world-class business leaders. So Poonam, thanks so much for being here today. I'll hand over to you for the next 20 minutes, and hopefully we have time for a couple of questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Esme, and hello to everybody. You know, I'm going to be giving you a brief overview about onboarding officers, and I think it follows on really nicely from the last segment to just explain a little bit more about having a profile career where you've got a number of non-exec positions maybe rather than an exec position. So we'll start off. This is about transferring your skill set into the boardroom post-service. What is the boardroom? So a lot of our experience have determined that, you know, from the skills that you guys have gained throughout your military careers, you do a lot of the things that would be required at a boardroom in the commercial world. So we try and translate the language that you are used to in this commercial way. So the boardroom is a military equivalent of the command room. It's where all the strategy is set and the forthcoming future of a business, looking at where do we want to be, how are we going to get there. It's where the decisions are made of significant concern. So that's where you would look at making anything material decisions at a boardroom level. So Joe's put this statement, it's where all the fun and action is. It's where things matter, and it's a matter of taking that strategic direction about a company. And there are thousands of boardrooms and there's thousands of opportunities. So we always think at onboarding officers that actually there's so much that you as personnel could give to these organisations, and building diverse boards is the main aim that we're trying to achieve, because it's proven time and time again, the more diversity we have in a boardroom, the more successful a business can be. What are the roles? So we'll talk about executive directors and non-exec directors, and we're going to just discuss the differences between them both. Executive directors are directors people who are looking for a full-time job post-service, who will be involved in the day-to-day operations of a business. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about exec directors. You will have a full-time role, you know, Monday to Friday, could be beyond that, and you'd be expected to make all the day-to-day operation decisions and be involved in those day-to-day operation decisions. A non-exec director, this is where you have no involvement on a day-to-day basis, but you are part of the board and you still share the same responsibilities and risks attached as an exec director. But what they're looking for from a non-exec director is to have that outside perspective. Again, it's about building diverse boards. So sometimes if you're embedded and you're doing the job 24/7, you may not have time to think a little bit outside the box, whereas the non-exec directors, they usually have commercial experience from different sectors, and they can bring that outside view and opinion. And the non-exec director's role is to, you know, question and challenge and support the executive board in their decision making. So why now? You know, one of our things is why not? So, you know, a lot of personnel that we've met throughout our presence with onboarding officers is that there's so much more that you can all give, and it's amazing the journey that you've all taken, because there's so much experience and skills that you've learned on your journey, and they would be just absolutely brilliant in a boardroom. We've already proven by people who have gone on to our program that actually they have joined boards, and actually that is been a success because it can bring that different type of thought process, different type of opinion, and the different type of skill set. So we say, you know, you are as well equipped and experienced as any equivalent business person, but in a different way. You are decisive, you're a natural leader, you can assess and evaluate risk a lot quicker than probably individuals in the commercial world. It's always, you know, you've been trained to always have a plan B to Z. You're exemplary communicators and you know how to cut through the rubbish. Thank you. What we think that you need help with, and where onboarding come on board to help transition into this commercial world, is that you may not know much about board governance, you may not know much about marketing, you may not know how to read a set of financial statements, so including balance sheets and cash flows. You may not be aware how to build a personal brand and sell yourself on social media. We help you make and develop relationships with the movers and shakers in the industry, so we can assist you in those steps. This is what we are trying to do. We're trying to share the translation guides and knowledge to assist you in the next steps of your career journey and embark on that commercial world with all the skills that you already have. So onboarding officers, what we want to say is we're just not an insight program. So we do run a number of programs, which I'll come on to in a moment, but it's much more than that training. What we are, we're an exclusive, prestigious community specifically for exiting military officers. So this is where we concentrate. So we're not, you know, we want to understand, we understand how coming into the commercial world from a military perspective can be challenging, and we want to make that journey as smooth as possible. So we are, you know, we're proud to say that we're finalists for the 2021 Northern Leadership Awards and for the best leadership program. We've got hundreds of testimonials from delegates that have already been on our program, and they've said it's the best thing ever. We're LCAS approved, so if you've got any LCAS credits, you know, you can use 80% towards the funding of the program and getting insight to the other benefits that come along with that. We're business people, and the tutors are business people who will deliver this. So they already work in a commercial world. They can bring life experience to the forefront for you to help with that understanding. We've got a number of partners, including the Officers Association, Neural and Dynamic boards. And what we're trying to do with our partners is add value to our delegates who come and embark on our journey. We've got a group of ambassadors and super-neds. So our ambassadors are people who have come from your world, in the sense of ex-military officers who have actually transitioned into this commercial world, and they help and support you and guide you and talk you through their journeys. And we've got our super neds, who are serial non-exec directors, again from the corporate world, that can support and guide you through this transition. We have only, small size groups when we're delivering our programs, and it's all face-to-face. So none of our programs are virtual. And what we try and do is, once you've gone through this program, we also give you exclusive board opportunities and boardroom observations. So when we're talking about boardroom observations, we can get you into boardrooms to observe them in real life, what actually happens in the commercial world. And we've got a number of partners that we've joined that will allow that. And then on top of all of that, we've got an exclusive networking and contact base, plus ongoing support to help all our delegates throughout this journey of transition. Getting into and staying in the boardroom, doors can open, but how do we keep hold of that position? What we will help you with is networking, developing your elevator pitch, having a magnificent CV, create a public image across social media platforms, go for voluntary roles initially to gain experience. That's one of the advice that we would give is, try and go for these pro bono roles to begin with, so you've got that experience, and then move on to paid roles if you are looking at embarking on a non-exec position as such. And like I said, we make use of the community that onboarding officers provide, which include the super neds, the ambassadors, the partners, and the boardroom links that we have. So our programs, there's 2 programs that we currently run. There's the non-exec director program, and then there's the exec program. The non-exec director program, this has been running for 2 years now, and we've got some upcoming cohorts on this, one in October and one in November, starting November and finishing early December. They are a 5-day program, is the non-exec program. It is a level 6 certificate in strategic planning and leadership. And as I explained earlier, we have got LCAS approved on this. So anybody looking at this, please get in touch and we can talk through the cost, the dates and anything of that nature. But if anybody is keen to join our October cohort, we would need to know by close of play Monday, because there's got to be a certain amount of days for LCAS funding to come through. So we just don't want you to miss out the boat if those dates work for you. And then obviously we've got the November dates that are detailed there, and there is 2022 dates available on our website. The executive program, this is for somebody who's looking for a full-time role post their military career. And what we do on this one, it's a level 4 awarding business essentials for business leaders, and that's going to be launched in 2022. We did a pilot course with the OA and it was very, very successful. So please, if anybody's interested in that course who's looking for a full-time career, talk to us about the exec program. But if anybody's looking at a portfolio career and would like non-exec director positions, please come and talk to us about our non-exec director program. So to join our community and programs, visit our website. There's contact details there as well for you to join. And finally, all I would say is, keep in touch. There's a number of social media links there for you to keep in touch, but I'd welcome any questions that you have specifically about the programs that we run and what we've achieved today.
Excellent, thank you. So we do have quite a few questions to get through in the next 5 or so minutes. So firstly, are there any types of industries or businesses that you're seeing that really need the strategic leadership of a military officer in the boardroom?
It's across the board, to be honest. There isn't one sector at all. What we're finding is that, you know, we've got a really good mix of different types of businesses requiring that diversity. So I don't think there is any particular sector that is very keen just at looking at ex-military officers. Really, it is diverse, but the larger and more medium-sized businesses seem to be more driven to that diversity. There has been some indication in smaller businesses that keeps to be growing as well, and we have seen, I think, a number of appointments in the aerospace divisions and things like that with ex-military colleagues, but we're always getting approaches from a number of companies because they know we run this onboarding program, they know the training that we put our delegates through, and they know that they'll be ready for that commercial world. So we're always been provided with different opportunities to present to our delegates.
That's really good intel, thank you. And what is it about the military experience that's so valued by commercial organisations?
I think, you know, the journey that a military person goes on, they're faced with so many challenges and so many obstacles, and they have to assess risk so quickly. It's about all those aspects of how you've been trained through your military career that actually nobody in the commercial world does get. So you know, you guys are trained for those kind of situations, whereas anybody who's coming not from a military background not necessarily has that training. So there is a lot of skills that you have gained through your military career and that you are prepared for, where a normal person probably wouldn't be, because they've not had to be trained in such a way.
That makes perfect sense, thank you. So next up we have a question from Mark in the audience, who's asking, is the training programme suitable for those looking to move into the third sector, such as a trustee on a charity board, as a school governor, or public sector, such as a local councillor?
Definitely, I would recommend you coming on one of these, and that's what I meant by about taking on opportunities that are pro bono basis, charities, schools or governors. Our programmes will cover, especially the non-exec programme, if you're looking to be a trustee or a school governor, that will cover those kind of roles too, but you will be equipped to embark on any paid positions as time or opportunities present themselves as well.
Thank you. And a question from David. What management qualifications would you advise people to gain that really make a difference on your CV?
To be honest, you know, I don't think that you need to have a management qualification to come on this program, because we do, you know, we do take things to basics as well. It is a very accelerated program, so there's a lot to get through on the 5 and the 4 day programs that we've developed, but we do it very much from a practical nature as well. So there's a lot of working in groups, working on tasks, and really driving on that important information that you will need in that commercial world for those commercial roles. If you do have some prior learning in terms of that, you may have some management qualifications, we can use that towards gaining the accreditation. So actually the assessment can be reduced significantly if you do have prior qualifications in management and leadership.
Excellent, thank you. And then just one final question. For those interested in building a non-exec portfolio, what kind of commitment does that tend to look like? How many days a month or a year do you see people working?
It will vary from company to company, but the average non-exec probably will turn up to meetings normally once a quarter. That's how it normally is derived. Now, depending on the organisation, there may be monthly meetings, but in general terms, it's probably once a quarter. And there will be some, work outside of that meeting in terms of reading the paperwork, being up to date, having a visit to the organisation. But I would say, anybody looking at a portfolio career probably should be looking at, for one organisation, probably, 2 to 3 days a quarter generally.
And do you often see people having more than one non-exec position at a time then?
Yes, no, definitely. That's why it's called a portfolio career, really. Normally if there's a individual that doesn't have an exec role, they may hold 5 or 6 board positions as a non-exec director. And the beauty of that is that you actually take experiences from one boardroom to another boardroom, and you can vice versa. And that really helps getting that experience and that vision, and really contributing to those meetings appropriately.
Brilliant. That is absolutely fantastic insight. Thank you for joining us today. I'll make sure that everyone has the slides afterwards and your contact details as well. If they
thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was insightful. But definitely, if anybody's looking at those October cohort dates, if you could get in touch by close of play Monday at the latest, we can then make sure that the LCAS funding's available.
Excellent. Thanks, Poonam.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.